the natural state of the free market is deflation. And then pair that with a credit-based system cannot allow that absolute truth. And it creates a cognitive dissonance in someone's mind. Socialism or capitalism. Those words actually don't mean anything. They're both control systems. Leaders take more control, remove individual rights and freedoms more. It's getting worse and worse at a faster and faster pace. We go to global conflict and then reset, and then we start over. Why? Because we've never had a global free market.
Welcome, everybody. Frank Corva, White House and political correspondent for Bitcoin Magazine, here joined by a very, very special guest, someone who I think of as I sort of jovially refer to him as the Eckhart Tolle of Bitcoin, kind of like a guru, someone who I look up to a lot. Very, very excited to have him here. Some of the questions that I want to ask him today are actually for my own personal gain as someone who speaks with politicians a lot. So Jeff Booth, someone who needs no introduction. Jeff, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
It's so good to see you, Frank.
Likewise. Jeff, you have a very profound way of speaking with people. You're very, very good at being very present to people, speaking from your heart. And I think that this resonates with people. And I would say that it seems to have resonated even with people in very high positions of power. Two of which come to mind right away are the mayor of Vancouver, which I think that's Ken Sim, as well as Pierre Poilievre, who was running for Prime Minister of Canada. I know a lot of people from the Bitcoin space are now interfacing with politicians, but it seems like the effect that you had, especially on Ken Sim, who I've interviewed, was profound. He really gets Bitcoin. He's truly an advocate for it. He's not just a politician talking about it. I'm curious as to how you did this. Maybe you could share some of your secrets if you don't mind.
I don't know if there's a secret. Okay. I think there's what you said before is it's the authenticity. I don't think this might sound different to a lot of people listening, but I don't think generally politicians or any subgroup of people are any different than us. It's easy to label somebody, this is how all of these people are, but that's just in-group, out-group bias.
Yep.
And any group of people is individuals within a group, seeing themselves as an individual. And so it's appealing to their honesty, their integrity, what they see. And the entire transition to Bitcoin, I think just largely what I see is, once you understand it, you can't believe other people can't see it. But you didn't understand it just 6 months, a year, 5 years ago. And so you forget where you were. And then you forget to talk to people in a way from where you were. So the high level, I think it's just authenticity and having people find it in their own way.
Okay. When it comes to essentially speaking to people authentically, speaking to these politicians authentically, getting them to believe in Bitcoin, I would imagine that both you and they are very conscious of the fact that there are probably still a lot of roadblocks within the existing system. We've talked a lot about the existing system not wanting to change, is going to do everything in its power to essentially not allow this change to occur. Do you speak with them about any of that? Basically, how to deal with some of the realities that are going to be presented once they sort of come out in favor of Bitcoin?
Oh, absolutely. Because you have to, because these are such crazy concepts. They're not crazy concepts. It's the objective reality of the world is the natural state of the free market is deflation. And just like you just did, nodded your head, people will nod their head with that statement, and they'll agree, and they know that we have to create in a free market more value for somebody else to be paid. And we have to create the more value, and then we use things that create more value. So how, with us at the center of that equation, could that not be true? So so it is true. It's an objective reality,
right?
Which think of what that means. It means we have never lived in a reality. We've never lived in that reality. We've never lived in a global free market. And so you have a perception of how the world needs to be wired, largely driven by our reaction within it. So it's not them, it's us. And that's really hard to understand, the implications of all of the things you've done in the other system that cause pain in the world, And the more that you lean in to try to solve the system problem from the system, the more you make it worse. And so there is no fix from there. And so why this is such a why this is such a challenge is effectively the consciousness, your conscious decisions within your, whether unconscious or conscious decisions within that system, perpetuate that problem. And you don't want to admit that it's you. That's really the hardest thing. It's easier to put your head in the sand and just say it's somebody else rather than you. And so why this is a individual, every individual on the planet trying to understand this and then moving their time from one system to another system. That's what it would look like, and that's why you can also easily look at the chaos that's coming from both systems and how they operate from that point of view.
Mm. As you talk about this, and as I think about systems, I think about a tweet I saw yesterday, and it was someone saying, Democrats are just proposing, I don't know, socialism for the housing crisis, because that seems pretty easy to understand. We're just going to take from these people and give it to you. And that's like a concept that most people can wrap their heads around. I currently live actually a few blocks from the office of Zoran Mamdani, or who the presumptive next mayor of New York City, who's offering a vision for New York City, a purely socialist vision for New York City. And I think a lot of people who maybe don't understand some of the concepts that you fully very much wrapped your head around when it comes to Bitcoin. I've done my best to wrap my head around, and other people in this space have done their best to wrap their head around. Their minds are not open to it because they're in a survival state, right? They're in this state of everything becoming more expensive. They don't understand why it's not working. Something else that comes to mind, I was just speaking with my sister, oldest sister's a single mother. She just said to me, like, but when are the groceries going to go down in dollar terms? Like, when is it going to be cheaper for me to feed my children?
Never.
It's yeah, correct. Yeah. And that's a really tough thing to say to someone, because so it might be sort of a proper appeal to logic, but we know that pathos is a part of this equation, right? So emotion is a huge part of this equation for people. And when you have the system, if they're so sort of conditioned to the system telling them what's right and wrong, and people believing that, and that's not a slight to my sister, I think that's a lot of people's sort of default. It's a really difficult thing to say, hey, but there is this alternative system here. We're seeing some movement with like the government embracing this, and maybe people's broadly speaking their ideas around what Bitcoin is changing, but it's still sometimes feels like an impenetrable layer to get through when it comes to getting this message to the populace. So I'm curious, like, what does that process look like? And especially for maybe politicians, people who are doing this messaging to the broader public.
That's why I start with the natural state of the free market is deflation, right? And I start with an absolute truth that people can realize, and then pair that with a credit-based system cannot allow that absolute truth. And so then that faces two truths in somebody's mind that are both true, that you can see the consequences of both. The consequences of both, and it creates a cognitive dissonance in someone's mind.
Right.
That they have to solve for themselves instead of myself solving and myself orange pilling, right? Then they have to go through that cognitive dissonance and understand their own role within whatever system. So, and because even what you just said, socialism or capitalism, what those words actually don't mean anything. They're both control systems.
Right.
They're both not the free market. And so what ends up happening is if you just use a toggle and you said the free market is the natural state of the free market is deflation. And after we go to war and reset currencies, we cheat that system, and it has to get further and further, more and more cheating, meaning more people have to be stolen from, more coercion, more control, more regulation, more crony capitalism, if that's the case, more centralization, and it has to get worse and worse and worse until essentially what we do is we divide a society, us versus them, as you're seeing playing this out. I wrote about this in my book, What Would Happen, right?
Yep.
And then we take more control, right? The leaders take more control, remove individual rights and freedoms more. And you can't fix it from that same instability. It's getting worse and worse at a faster and faster pace. So you have to create an enemy outside your borders. to convince your people that it's not their fault, it's somebody else's fault, which we go to global conflict and then reset and then we start over. The entire history of the world could be looked at through that lens. Why? Because we've never had a global free market. So we've always played a zero-sum game, and from within that zero-sum game, people are playing this game and they don't know that they're losing because the global free market makes you're playing an infinite game. Everybody wins. And so if you were in, say, the UK or the British Empire, when the sun never sets on the British Empire, if you're inside that and you're the winner, someone else's loss, you don't see the pain inflicted in somebody else somewhere else in Africa or the likes, because you're at the top of the global game. Same thing in the US today. People can start to feel it, but they haven't felt what's actually happening all around the world because of that global game that they're winning.
Yes. You've talked about this, so understanding that, on some level, being entrepreneurially successful, it does depend on the individual, but it also depends on sort of some of the system operating on the backs of people in this part of the world. But it's very in other parts of the world, like in different parts of Africa, maybe Latin America, Southeast Asia. But what is people's incentive? I think there are a decent amount of people who do know that and don't really have much of an issue with it. Sort of like maybe they throw their hands up and say the world is what it is. Plus, you have a lot of entrenched power that wants to keep things that way. Do we just sort of allow for this psychological process to essentially change people's incentives, and therefore over time the global system changes, it becomes more oriented around Bitcoin?
Everything we just discussed, right? It's really hard to change people's incentives inside that system. Because what ends up happening just from game theory, it's just prisoner's dilemma. If you looked at it, people are so worried about somebody else cheating them, they'll cheat first.
Right.
So if you have an unstable system based on that, you can expect humanity, your own role in it, to be able to just keep doing it and put your head in the sand and then the whole thing gets worse and you blame other people when it's actually you.
Right. Okay.
Now but before we go there, now let's say what Bitcoin did. It's an open, decentralized, secure protocol bounded by energy. And if it stays decentralized and secure, which I'm pretty sure it will, why am I pretty sure it will? Because it's the nodes, the consensus mechanism, and tens of thousands of nodes who know this problem now and are defending this network. And so it's very, very hard to cheat. And as more people know this network, it provides a base level for humanity that is a different structure. And what would you ask? What is it doing to the other control structure? It's completely repricing and not just repricing, but changing the entire lens of society. And it's just very early. So if you think you're making 8% a year, and inside that other system, and the money supply is rising by 8% a year, and you're actually just losing money in Bitcoin versus that other system, the IRR is 45%.
Right.
Then you're being repriced whether you know it or not. And so that base level, that honest level, that essentially truth, that objective reality, or ask a different question. If the natural state of the free market was deflation, which it clearly is, and now you had a protocol bounded by energy that you couldn't cheat, what would you expect to see? You would expect to see falling prices forever from the honest protocol. And then now what do we see? We see exactly that. My house was 300 Bitcoin 5 years ago. Now it's 11 Bitcoin. It'll continue. My energy prices look the same. It's perfectly describing objective reality. Well, most people are measuring it from a perspective reality.
Agreed 100%. I think one of the issues I'll say in the United States is that I think we're doing a very good job here of coming up with, Bitcoin, financialized Bitcoin products. And then a lot of people are sort of thinking about still the dollar as the denominator, and then they're investing in this product and their product is going up in terms of dollars or whatever. That seems like a very difficult trend to reverse. And I think especially also we're seeing there's been some I would say in the wake of maybe the Samurai trial, there's been, and now with the Treasury talking about more KYC on wallets, more of like a pushback on trying to stop the P2P space when it comes to Bitcoin from emerging. And I think this is going to be the next big fight. So when it comes to us, I don't want to say winning that fight, because actually I don't even like putting it in those terms. Let me think of it a different way. When it comes to us basically being able to use Bitcoin as cash, I still am sort of struggling to find ways to relate to people who are incentivized by the old system to describe why it would be important for that to prevail, for Bitcoin to be used as cash, especially anonymously slash pseudonymously. So kind of, facetiously here, joking for any tips on how to do that, given that we are predominantly interacting with people who are thinking about things through the old system lens.
So look at what ends up happening when so over time, and I've written about this. Money is subordinate to law,
Mhm.
and so laws always change to control money, and the people at the top of the money control the laws, and they change. And by the way, if it didn't look like that, you'd expect the places with the most broken money to have the best laws protecting citizens.
Right. Yeah.
So you can see what ends up happening. And by the way, the free market has always existed. And in those countries, you have a black rate for money
Yes.
and posted rate, and a different market exists for the free market. So you can expect what would happen out of more and more coercion. And remember what the coercion is doing as well. As it's trying to do this, all of your all of your digital identity is also tracked, and you're inside an AI system controlled by the same money that everybody is making stronger and stronger with all of their actions in this. And it looks very dystopian. Now that if you're measuring from that system, you could get very fearful of what would happen.
Yep.
But what would naturally that create? That would create the opportunity to solve problems for humanity that would create all of the value outside of that. So we're just very early in that happening on Bitcoin, but that's where all of the opportunity is moving. It's beautiful, and it's exploding, and it cannot be stopped. It won't be stopped because we are it, right? And so we won't live in cages. Humans won't live in cages. And so it provides, even though this is unknown by most of the planet, that's what entrepreneurs always do. Entrepreneurs go and solve the problem that people don't know they have yet. And if they're right, they create tons of value. So now, if a country is trying to suppress that value will move to somewhere else.
Right.
It won't be stopped.
It seems like, given that we have these institutions like the World Economic Forum and these other sort of bigger, these huge global institutions, it seems like now the fight is moving to the internet. Like the physical, there's sort of like physical,
Yeah.
well, physical jurisdictions still matter. As we see, we have places like El Salvador that are more open and willing to, embrace Bitcoin. Other places around the world as well, maybe to other degrees, lesser degrees. But it seems like, I would imagine, people are trying to, the powers that be, the people at the top of the current money structure, would like to make most of the world as unfriendly to Bitcoin as possible. So you could sort of win the fight on the internet, but we're still going to need to consider the jurisdictional fight that needs to happen, because we live in the real world. We live in a physical world. So does that worry you at all? Like, do you think it'll be a game of whack-a-mole where another country always pops up and says, "Oh, okay, there we go."
Yeah. And again, I think I explained this in a different way. The free market, what built the US in the beginning was individual rights and freedoms. The people moved from Europe, where they couldn't thrive, to make use of their minds to create tons of value that created the US empire because of the individual rights and freedoms. If the US wants to suppress that, or China wants to suppress that, or India wants to suppress that, there will always be somewhere else that will allow that to happen, and they'll benefit from it. So I'm not saying that this won't be chaotic on the way through, because most
Right.
people don't understand this, but every time you naturally say those people are stopping me, or talking about those people from that system, you're making that system stronger. And you can just tune the whole thing out and spend time building in the free market, and making that stronger. You can just move your time. I say this often, but people are inside a jail cell yelling at the captor from
Right.
inside the jail cell while the door is
Right.
open. Well, the door is open, and they could just take all of that energy that they're yelling with and move it into something that cannot be stopped.
Yep.
And that energy, that feeling of moving your energy, it doesn't mean that this isn't still happening,
Right.
right? It doesn't mean that most people don't are still caught in the jail cell,
Right.
but it means you don't have to be.
With that comes responsibility, right? You and I have both done lectures in the Bitcoin Dada program, and one of the first things that I try to, they had me do a Bitcoin 101 class in that program, and one of the first things I say is like, yes, this stuff does offer freedom, but it requires responsibility. And I also talk about what I consider to be a bit of an emotional recalibration that has to take place for being responsible for the keys to a bearer asset and what that means. And we know that situation can be more challenging to people depending on what their physical safety looks like and the physical structure they live in and where they could store that seed phrase, all of this stuff. But oddly enough, those women seem most willing to do it. Now, these are women who can't inherit property in East Africa. They're sort of second class citizens when it comes to actually having being able to own assets and things like that. So they sort of understand this thing intuitively. And I think on a certain level, it's sad to say this, and I don't like to put it this way, but I think on some level, pain will end up being a lot of a major teacher for people when it comes to this. So they'll hold on to the old system for as long as it lasts until they just can't do so anymore. I guess what I'm trying to wrap my head around, to maybe tie that into what you said about people don't want to live in cages, they won't live in cages. Does the government eventually just respond to that? Maybe the pain gets so great they have to start using something like Bitcoin, and then law, as you said, is sort of something that follows suit
Every different country will experience this
differently.
differently.
Yeah.
And a simple equation would be why in Venezuela, why did most people stay in the system when they could have bought Bitcoin,
Right.
right?
Right.
And those people that stayed in the system where the Bitcoiners got out of Venezuela because they had wealth and the cap and everything else, they could just move across the border with words in their head.
Yep.
The other people got stuck, and coercion and control got worse and worse and worse. And then you have marches on the street, millions of people marching on the street, making it stronger. And it's not change. It doesn't change, and it keeps on. And all of those people getting hurt more and more and more. So it's not that it doesn't exist. It's just most people don't have agency. They don't know what's happening.
Right.
So they don't take their agency. Now, where's that different from the people that you know? You've mentioned Bitcoin Data, which is just beautiful people
Yes.
all around the world that just found out and started learning and then started contributing more of their time to the honest system, the open system. And from contributing their time to the honest system, helped so many other people, inspired other people, and moved more time. And their lives just got better and better and better as they moved their time to the honest system. And just about everyone I know in the system, they're doing the same thing, and they're disengaging from that other system and moving more time. And their disengagement from the system based on corruption is the thing that they're seeing in the free market shine back at them.
Yeah.
But by the way, why would that make sense? Because free market values impact on other people. It makes perfect sense.
Could you unravel that a bit more? Or what can I say? Could you explain that a bit more?
The only way to get paid in the free market is to provide more value to somebody else. So if you had this massive change in something that has never existed before, that was an expression of the free market, but most people didn't know, if you really knew and you knew how to connect to those people in all different ways, creating businesses that protected them from what's coming, creating educational content to help those people, the more people you helped, the better you would do. Because the free market, you cannot get paid without, in the true free market, without competing to provide value.
Right.
With the entire world. So if you're competing to provide value, you have to be really good at your craft, because you could compete to be, and now that is exactly what's happening. You have this new protocol that's largely so misunderstood.
Yeah.
It's so misunderstood even by a bunch of Bitcoiners who think they understand it because it's so new, right? And what people are doing is they're integrating a former reality, trying to make those work together,
Right.
and they can't, right? So if the free market, the natural state of the free market is deflation, that cannot coexist with an inflationary monetary system. One has to kill the other. And so what's happening right now is all of the value, all of the early value, just like early internet. If you were in the internet, and it was a new protocol that was changing everything. The value would be captured by the people that are building on the new protocol.
Yep.
And so that's what, but in this way, it doesn't get captured, because if you capture value and somebody else sees the margin go up and you're making a ton of money from that, then they will compete with you and prices keep falling for everyone else, because in the free market, prices continue to fall forever because we have to provide more value. It's a perfect expression of providing more value. And if you measure Bitcoin against that, you'll see a perfect reality unfolding, the first global free market that's ever existed.
Amazing. I love it. I'm feeling good hearing this kind of stuff. I want to go to your, what comes to mind as you're talking about this is someone like Bukele. And my thoughts with him is, did he really get it right away when he first decided to embrace Bitcoin? I think that was back in 2021. Did he get it right away? Or like everyone else, did he sort of see an opportunity, thought it was interesting, said, hey, let's give this a shot, and then maybe kind of got it more and more as time went on? And I say that because I know you met with him recently and you came away from the meeting, at least from I think what you posted on LinkedIn, saying, he was one of the most thoughtful leaders you'd ever met. And you seem to have faith in his vision. So I was wondering if you could share a bit more about that, and then maybe what you think the future for El Salvador looks like as a result.
I was supposed to meet with him for half an hour. I met with him for 2.5 hours. He really understood the subject of my book, why the free market is deflation. He also understands why we've never lived in that, and he also understands his role in that. Now he's changing a country, and Bitcoin's so early. Even inside that country, you'd expect, okay, if you need money and all of the money of the global forces of money, you'd expect that global forces to try to co-opt that. You'd expect him to be fighting or taking a stand against that. And then you'd ask questions on why did he allow the IMF back in? And you'd ask so very pointed questions on why did that happen? And you'd have to say, okay, does he understand the strategy and he's playing the game, or is he being led back into the
Right.
co-opted?
Yep.
By the way, that would be true for every single one of us, every single leader, every
Sure.
single right. And so through that conversation, he said a couple things that made me understand. It made me think, wow, he actually may want the best for his population, his country. And if he did, let's go through it. He said, I need more of my people in self-custody. I need more nodes run. I need more people spending Bitcoin in this country. And so much so that he asked me to help put on a conference in November. It's going to be announced probably next week. It's just before adopting Bitcoin,
Okay.
where he wants to bring this to the forefront because it's so important for his country. Wants to drive actually Bitcoin as spending and self-custody, really critical for his country. Now, so if that's true, then his power as a leader would be taken as more of the power went to his citizens. So he actually couldn't long-term be a dictator if people say he's a dictator, if that was true, if that was true, because if that was true, then he might go down as one of the greatest leaders of all time. Now we have to say, what's the proof of work that that is true? Is it true? And does he change one day or not? But I got a real sense that he means it.
Okay. I say this a lot also to address the IMF thing. I think people also don't realize that, aside from promoting Bitcoin in El Salvador, he also has to make sure like we still live largely within a current system. He has to make sure that people in El Salvador, that there aren't defaults on current loans and things like this. The IMF situation, I would say, is unfortunate. It's an unfortunate reality, but it's a reality that all leaders in Latin America and different parts of the world deal with. I think looking at it from afar, I would imagine I'll give him credit to say it seemed like he dealt with it the best way he could. And I think it's just a difficult sort of situation. But in terms of credibility around Bitcoin, yeah, it didn't seem like they have wavered at all. I've been in touch with Stacy, people like John from ePremier Bitcoin. And there are still efforts happening on the ground. And I think that that's the most important thing, that the people are still being educated. But I think your last point is really important. I have some family members that have done a lot of work in Latin America, really good work, humanitarian work. And they genuinely can't stand them. They're very quick to call him a dictator, as you just said. But the ironic part there is that most dictators around the world do not like, well, I'll just call it freedom money, do not like the fact that they're empowering their people to use a certain currency. Why do you think that this isn't more broadly brought up? I think that's one of the biggest points you just made. It's one of the biggest things to sort of pay attention to. And you've also spoken, I think, in the past about, most people think they live in a democracy, but if they don't have control over their money or they don't know what monetary policy is, they don't technically live in a democracy. For us, look how many people pay attention to every single word that Jerome Powell spoke about an hour and a
It's
half ago.
crazy.
Right.
Crazy.
So, I mean, on a certain level, when you think about this stuff, what is democracy? What are these forms of government? Similar to the fact that you spoke earlier about the fact that we've actually never lived in a free market system, and that capitalism and free market are two different things, especially the quote unquote capitalism that has existed since 1971, fiat capitalism,
Crony capitalism.
crony capitalism, right? When it comes to this sort of messaging, it's you're pushing back against a lot of things that people sort of consider normal, their normal framework for thinking about things. So, I mean, it's similar to the earlier questions I asked. It's again, sort of, how do you transmit this information? And I get it. You do it authentically. You do it heart to heart. But I think it's a matter of, I guess, in my mind, I'm thinking through it. It's just like, it's constantly sort of addressing the fact that people's frameworks are maybe
skewed.
I think that's a kind way to put it. Yeah.
We don't have a word to describe what I'm. So when people are saying left or right, or capitalism or socialism, they're referring to frameworks on top of broken money.
Right.
That we don't have a word to understand. So it's so natural to get divided by that same thing and think that you're the winner and my system is better. And now that you're not arguing about truth, you're arguing my team is better than the other team because our broken money will spend it differently than your broken money.
Right.
And it's ludicrous, but people can't see themselves in that argument because they're so caught in the fight that they think it's somebody else, the socialists or the capitalists, but if it's broken money, it's all the same fight.
Agreed 100%. I think in speaking with everyday people, plus speaking with politicians, I think the argument would be that you're giving too much credit to the money. It's not necessarily the money. So I guess, what would you say in response to that? There's other factors at play. Maybe the money is one part of the equation, but it's not everything.
I think it's everything.
Okay.
I actually think it's everything. Ask any politician, ask anyone on either left or right, how they're going to make the world wealthier by printing more pieces of paper. How or not wealthier. How are you going to solve the problem you care about most by printing or arbitrarily printing more pieces of paper? Where does the printing of those pieces of paper go, and how does your problem get fixed by doing so?
Yep.
Because it's such a challenging concept, it should be super simple. But because it's such a challenging concept from the perspective of the system, people aren't asking themselves that question, and they're doing the short-term thing that's making the long-term thing worse and worse and worse. And you can feel it, the entire world shifting to this thing getting worse and worse and worse. And if they asked where they were 10 years ago or 20 years ago, if everything's accelerating and people are getting more and more fearful, relying on the same tools that is causing the fear, and getting more and locking into a system when the opposite, everything is opposite in the other system.
Okay. You talked about different countries reacting differently to Bitcoin, maybe treating it differently. I think a quote comes to mind. I recently spoke with someone who works in a think tank, and he said, the United States is doing a great job in becoming the regulated Bitcoin ETF capital of the world, but it's not necessarily doing a great job in, in people using Bitcoin as money. I guess I think one of the anxieties that people have, and I've had this conversation with some pretty prominent developers in this space, is that I don't think people want to be martyrs. And as systems
Mhm.
change, you talked about chaos, and someone said it best. They're like, I don't want to be, once a year tweeting, hashtag Frank when it comes to like what Frank did for the movement and him being the martyr. So I think the big sort of the magic to Bitcoin is that we're all in this together. It's a sort of a global movement. It's a borderless movement. But at the same time, it does seem like the old system will try to make, I don't know, certain martyrs out of people. It's a matter of how do you get people to take some of the necessary steps? And I say this, I was speaking with Femi Longe from HRF about this, and we're in complete agreement that the way Bitcoin proliferation has to work is much like the way Uber worked. You don't really ask permission, you just start doing it, and then it just becomes a thing that goes on. Do you feel, given that Uber is not as ride shares or taxis are not as sensitive a subject as money. It's a bigger thing. Like, do you feel that these two things? Do you feel like that's a fair way to look at it, or is there going to be greater pushback on something like Bitcoin because it is challenging the current system, the current monetary and financial system?
There's going to be a ton of pushback. Just what I described as far as um, that system of coercion. There is no halfway. It has to be a totalitarian control system with you in it, or a free market.
Yeah,
These systems are opposite, and so your choice within which system is what gives the system power.
yeah,
And so now you should take that and make your choice. And each person will make their choice. But what I will say is that free market through hope, energy, truth, abundance is the reflection of what I see. I wouldn't have known this 7 years ago. By moving my time into this system,
right.
what would happen to my life and who I would meet and what met you, and all of these really beautiful people that are building to an abundant future. Not only that, when so in ego death, the companies we're investing in, a lot of those companies are going from seed stage to massive growth and profitability, for profitability in Bitcoin. So you're adding Bitcoin to the balance sheet each month by solving market problems that move society forward, and you're building the rails to this new society at the same time.
Yeah.
When I say an expression of the free market, you do extraordinarily well by building where to the market's going. Most people stay stuck, and they're not measuring the future; they're measuring um, the present projected forward.
Mm, interesting.
Um, and so when you actually can understand it, when you see a change, and even if that change is early, in fact, primarily when that change is early, and most of the world doesn't see that change, you can build to what will provide the path for those people to start to see this, and you make the whole system easier and easier to integrate with. And it's more private, or you're having, so there's a whole bunch of tools and layers on top of Bitcoin that are getting easier, and tons of entrepreneurs solving these problems all different ways. It's providing resilience for what's coming from the other system.
Okay. One final question. When I think sometimes about the current administration in the United States and their embrace of Bitcoin, and I think, again, embrace for a certain level of embrace for Bitcoin. I have had, a lot of conversations with people from the administration as well as Trump and his sons. And when I do sit with someone like Eric Trump and he does talk to me as Bitcoin as property and it's property for people who can't afford physical property in the world, it does make me think that they're having some of the right conversations. And because they have exposure to this, they have that emotional effect that I talked about of like, they understand, I guess, even if you're just talking about number go up, they sort of understand the effect that this is having on the world. Do you feel like it's necessary that the people in power actually have that experience with Bitcoin on some sort of personal level, not just even being taught about it, but where they have legitimate exposure to it, where they're potential ideally using it. Is that a necessary part of the equation for changing leaders' minds?
I don't think Trump would have got elected if he wasn't pro Bitcoin.
Yes, agreed.
So you asked a different question on leaders and such. Over time, people see the truth, right? So you can lie to them for a little while, but then if things get, and over time, that provides authentic leadership
Yep.
on the truth.
Mm,
Bukele has a 92% approval rating in his
mm,
country. And why? Because he's talked about some of these things, and he's making change in this society. And every leader inside the free market, that's actually what's creating the opportunity.
yep.
And so, if you're against this, essentially lying to people, they can feel it.
Yes,
They
you're
can,
right.
right? They can feel it, and and so an authentic leader that stands out on something like this, even if it might be early, like Ken Sim, most of Vancouver doesn't understand this, and he might be early on this, but people will remember him cycles later because he stood up for something of value. He
Yep.
stood up for them.
Yep.
Authentic leadership.
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful way to leave it, actually. I think that's really, that is important. And I think we do underestimate the populace too much. I think this sort of stuff resonates with people on a level that maybe even the people themselves aren't fully aware of, but it does have does have a genuine impact. Yeah, we'll leave it there. Is there anything else that we, I guess, as it pertains to Bitcoin adoption, leaders in the world, how they're looking at it, anything else we didn't touch on that you'd like to mention?
It's a change in all of us, and it's a change in every single person, and as they come to a deeper understanding. Here's everything that you need to know about economics. Everything.
I can't wait.
um, we we have to create value for other people in a free market, and the more people you add to that system, the faster prices fall. That's it. That's all of economics, meaning everything you've ever been questioning about economics is from the control system trying to get you to not understand something that could be understood by a 5-year-old.
Okay. Only question about that though is that the price is falling. We all know, we all want prices to fall living in the inflationary environment we're living in. But my only question there, does it lead to another potential control system for people that have then more Bitcoin? Because they're
No.
okay. Why not? Why not?
And
If you don't mind me asking.
because let's imagine, I don't, because I don't want to do the opposite, but let's imagine I controlled 100,000 Bitcoin, or you controlled 100,000 Bitcoin, and prices kept falling and falling and falling and falling. But that wouldn't, so you would have purchasing power, but you'd
Yep.
have no more control.
Okay.
So
Okay.
what would you do? What would you do with your purchasing power? Right? You would spend it. You would donate it. You would do, because you would. It would be in time. It would be infinite purchasing power.
Hmm.
So it wouldn't give you more control of the system. It would give you more purchasing power. And what would you do with your overspending versus your value to society?
Yeah.
You'd be distributing your Bitcoin.
I agree with that mostly, but I also think it's coming out of that, you saying that. I think there's a lot of part. You're a good human being, Jeff. You're a fantastic human being. My only fear there is, what if people didn't have such good intentions and they wanted to start, I don't know, enslaving others because now they have this extra purchasing power and they can make people who have less
So,
Bitcoin do something. That's my only fear with this
but
stuff.
what would they do with it if prices were globally falling over and over and over? They would be distributing to the people that they were hiring to say
Oh, that's
that
true.
they would
Yeah.
be distributing their Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So so they have to the only way they can compete and get more is by providing more value to society than they're
Yeah.
consuming. Otherwise, they have to distribute the Bitcoin.
Hmm.
I build a standing army to control everyone. What am I doing? I'm distributing my Bitcoin.
That's true. I didn't even think about it like that. Yeah, that's a good point. Or on some level, I did. I guess I think more in terms of like, is that, I would say, is that going to be enough? But yeah, the distribution of Bitcoin is the key thing there. So yeah, that's interesting. Appreciate that. Always enlightening talking to you, Jeff. Appreciate it. I do think about this. Like I said, we've had this conversation. I come from working in social systems. I was training to be a clinical social worker. I worked with immigrants in New York for 12 years, and I know there's a lot of anxiety around those in the lower socioeconomic classes because there are certain social programs that sort of obviously do help them in a substantial way. But I know you've commented on this as well. You've talked about what things like the IMF would turn into on a Bitcoin standard, and in that vision, there's less giving money to then control people and more just giving money to give money to people to help to actually make a situation better.
I think that's the hardest thing. All of these institutions, which people believe are protecting them,
Yep.
y- you have to ask, where does the money come from
Right.
to protect them? And it comes from more and more theft from those people.
Yep.
That keeps them locked into a system of rising prices forever, so that it gets more and more control.
Yep.
And it's coming from them. And the opposite system, that's why it's so hard. And we're trying to fit these two models together when they can't fit together.
Yep. I'm going to leave it there, Jeff.
Okay.
From a personal angle, I have a lot to think about now. So I'm going to stop there for selfish reasons. Also, not to take up too much of your time. Jeff, just wanted to say on camera, I really appreciate everything that you do, who you are, what you do for this space. And also, I think there's a beauty in the fact that you don't underestimate your listeners, and think instead of watering things down, you distill things in ways, or you really attempt to distill things for different people in ways that people from around the globe can understand it. And I think that speaks to some of what you were talking about with being an authentic leader, right? Don't talk down to people. Don't sort of don't think that they can't grasp things, accept that they can, and try to meet them where they're at. I think you do a masterful job of that, which is why I, had the impetus to have you on here. So thank you so much for joining us.
Really appreciate you too.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it. Everybody, thank you guys for watching. Obviously, follow everything Jeff is doing. Follow what Ego Death Capital is doing, his VC firm, and we will talk soon, everybody. Take it easy.